Hello. Good evening. I tend to find that these things are a bit too formal. So to relax myself, I'd like to tell you a little story about me and a chicken. So when I was a little boy, my grandmother gifted me a chicken. Don't ask me why a chicken, but she thought it was a good idea. I must have been 4, maybe 5 at the time. And my grandmother, I am traditional Zulu. My grandmother comes from a very deep part of KZN, Echozini. And so we used to go visit every single school holiday, as it were. And in this particular instance, my grandmother gifted me a chicken. I liked the chicken. I wasn't sure why, but again, took the chicken. And I took the chicken and I put what you might call a little rope around the chicken's leg. Because I didn't have a cage, you see. I didn't want to lose the chicken. And you know how black people are with chicken. Feel free to laugh. So I took the chicken and I had a little rope on one of the chicken's legs and I tied it to a little fence next to my grandmother's door. And every so often I'd go and check on the chicken, etc., etc. And before the end of this particular school holiday, my grandmother said to me that I could now untie my chicken and the family would enjoy the feast of what happens when you have untied said chicken. So I did. I went to the chicken and untied it, but I didn't want the family to enjoy the chicken. And so I tried very hard to shoo the chicken away, because after you've untied it, you would think that the chicken would run. And it didn't. And I shooed it some more, and the chicken didn't run. My theory is that this is exactly where Africa and African entrepreneurs are today. You and I, we're that chicken. And over the past 400 years, we've had systems that have tied us on our legs and told us what we can and cannot do, that which we are and are not capable of. It has given a quality of education to our parents that has turned them into nothing more than simple mere mortals, in truth, living marginally better than slave laborers. It has created an economic system of capital that has exploited our resources and our people. And then, since independence, whether you talk about the great nation of the people of Ghana or where we are in South Africa just 22 years ago, it has said to us, right, dear chicken, you're free, run. And so here's the question. How can we? When we don't have a history of economic liberation, how do we do it? When none of us in our parents or our families, and certainly not in mine, have had a particular history of people who've understood how to create economic enterprise, how do we turn around and say to young people, build a business? Who do they model? Where do they learn? From whence does the knowledge come? You heard in the introduction that I was privileged to be invited onto the panel for Dragon's Den. You know that on TV now is the other program. I was asked to be on that too. Just for the record, I was asked to be on that too, and my response to the producers was, I can only be one mythical creature at a time. So that, and let me tell you the part of the truth that you're not seeing. So people watch a platform like Dragon's Den and they see investors say yes or no. I parted with 4 million rand of my own money during the season. I lost all of it. Yeah, there's the part nobody tells you. It's very nice to talk about funding and venture capital. What nobody tells you is that's real money that real people work for that is intended to build our continent. So who do we blame? Do we blame the archaic systems of economic capital? I studied finance, by the way. My background is investment banking. I specialized in leverage. My job was to walk into offices of CFOs of companies that didn't need leverage, convince them to buy companies they shouldn't buy, leverage balance sheets which they shouldn't be doing, raise cash which they wouldn't be able to apply on levels of credit they would never be able to afford. 5 years later, unable to pay back that money, then re-leverage their balance sheet. Today, that thing has a very nice word called private equity. My argument, and I might step on some toes by saying this, but I believe it, Africa doesn't need more private equity. We don't need more specialized leverage finance houses. That's not what we need. We forget that private equity was a construct of the United States and much later Europe, only as late as the 1940s. After they had had 600 years of building economic systems, they introduced the instrument of private equity capital. And yet here we are, barely a century in, and we think it'll help us build high-growth businesses. Now, it's not the instrument that's the problem, it's how it is being applied. So I want to take you on a fictional journey because I think this might help us better understand what is at the heart of the issue. Go back with me to the beginning of time, the very beginning of time. And in a small cave somewhere in the southern part of Africa, you find two men. Ladies, excuse me if I may be patriarchal. These two men are sitting doing what men do when they have free time. Nothing. And the one man, call him Boet, says to his other friend, Johan. He says, so Johan, hoe gaan het? Johan says, ja, gaan lekker. He says, what are we going to do with our free time now that our wives have let us off for the afternoon? And Johan said, I know, nothing. Back then, the version that you and I would have had of watching a FIFA or an F1 race or PlayStation was two men playing around with rocks. And they did. They played around with some rocks and some sticks. And by chance, the rocks happened to knock against each other. Now, what happens when rocks knock against each other? They spark. His friend was very clever. He said, do that again. And they did it again. And the rocks touched and it sparked again. So the friend runs outside. He collects a wee bit of dry grass. He puts it all together in a mound with some small sticks. And he consistently knocks the rocks against each other until he discovers, as you and I have it today, fire. Why is this important? Well, because read your books on anthropology and your anthropologists will tell you that the very first time man encountered the construct of what we call technology today was through the discovery of fire. You see, fire made the material life of man much better. It increased his life expectancy, allowed him to warm up the cold nights and create light in the dark evenings. It allowed him to fend off much, much larger, much stronger predators. Fire changed the material nature of man's existence on earth. Now fast forward a century or two, or maybe even a couple of century thousands. You're in the Middle Ages. The idea of the nation state is giving birth. You see, before then, man existed in these things called small tribes. If you read the book, The Theory of 21, we're told about how tribes emerged because without a complex management system, you couldn't manage more than 21 people at a time. Today, we call it the organizational framework, the hierarchy. Back then, it was the chief and the people around him. Except somebody thought, what would happen if we combined all the tribes? And they did, combined tribes and formed nation states. Except you know, if you read the history books, how do you combine smaller tribes? You have to conquer them. Conquering them means war. War is a dirty business. But who wins wars? They that have better armies and superior technology. As a proud Zulu man, we are taught about the Battle of Isandlwana. One of the greatest kings of my people, Thembekwayo, led a strong regiment of 20,000 Zulu soldiers to fight just over 1,800 British men. We're proud of this as Zulus because it's the first and only time the British were ever defeated by an army that was not carrying conventional arms. And yet, the truth is, the Zulus only just won that war. How is it possible that arguably the best trained army regiment ever in the history of the continent was nearly defeated by an army from Britain only a tenth of its size? It's possible because the Brits had a superior technology. Whereas the Zulus had to get close and use spears, the British could use cannons and guns. The gun and the cannon changed the history of mankind. In fact, you might argue it brought us to where we are today. Fast forward a couple of hundred more years, the invention of the ship meant that man could move from one continent to the other. The migration of goods, many large businesses which exist even today would not be around were markets not connected through the invention of ship through waters. The Wright brothers invented the very principles of flight you and I use today to move from one place to another on metal steel that goes really fast and flies above the weather. The invention of electricity meant that in the Industrial Revolution, whereas man existed for his own subsistence, after the Industrial Revolution, man could create and sell goods in markets outside his own environment. Now, of the 5 milestones I've mentioned that have shaped the journey of the world and that have brought us to where we are today as human civilization, might I ask this question? How many of them come from this continent of ours? My own view is that these young entrepreneurs today, if I may be so bold, need to be told a different truth. And the truth is that your job is not to grow turnover by 100%, employ marginally more people, increase your EBITDA, reduce your weighted average cost of capital. Your job is to rewrite the history of this continent, to bring your job is to bring a sense of pride to that which is African. To walk into a stage and say whether or not it comes from Silicon Valley or Silicon Nairobi, it too matters. It too matters. Now, I travel our beautiful continent often. I love the continent. I do a lot of work there. I have businesses around the continent. And for me, there is one thing about which I'm most sad, and this is why I'm particularly honored at this invitation, and I think is perhaps at the heart of the work that the Anzisha Prize does, and certainly that the Academy does, is that even all these years post our liberation, we continue to think about ourselves in our ideas of nation states, that we form our identity by where we come from or what our ethnicity is, when in fact we don't realize that we live in arguably the greatest and largest marketplace in the world. I was in Ghana 3 weeks ago and met an amazing young lady. And she makes bags with Ghanaian patterns. In fact, it's the pattern of the La people who live and come from the area known as Labadi, where the beach hotel is. If you don't know the story about why it's called Labadi, it's because the La people in that part of Accra were the first and only people to understand that the colonizers who came with a nefarious purpose. So they didn't want to trade with the colonizers, and the colonizers said they are the bad ones, the La bad people, Labadi. Interesting story. But this particular young lady makes beautiful bags with La patterns. And I bought the bag and I came home and I gave it to my wife, and my wife says, I love the bag. Where can I buy another? I said, I don't know. She's in Accra. And yet, if I was somewhere in New York City and that young lady was in Boston, Massachusetts, or traveled to the other side of Los Angeles, it would have been easy for me to move the goods from that part to my part. Our greatest challenge today is to connect each other to each other. Is to bring your goods to my market, because whether or not I like it, I can't sell Mon Debele prints in South Africa, but I could possibly move them in Marrakesh. I cannot sell Moswazi batatas in KZN, but I could possibly sell them in Baganda people in Uganda. Yours and my greatest challenge as entrepreneurs today is to connect each other to each other. And so I want to say, if I may be so bold, well done on your journey. Congratulations on what you've done, but understand that yours and my journey only begins now. The history of this continent will be written 100 years from today, and the true question that must be asked is whose name will resonate in those history books? When they tell the stories of Rome, they talk about great emperors that brought that civilization to what it is. Well, who will we be in 100 years' time? Who amongst us will dare build an institution that will far outlive yours and my meager existence? Because the very challenge that has brought us to where we are today as Africans is we've had leaders who've not been able to think beyond their own life terms. You and I, as Africans, perhaps, need a different relationship with time. One that transcends the flesh and moves into the spirit and creates for the future. I am truly humbled that you've invited me here. To the winner, I will be seated here and will give you my bank account when I'm done. But to all of you who've supported this cause, I want to say, Asante Sana. The world needs more of that. Congratulations and enjoy your evening.